Hey folks, Captain Mike here from Salty Cape, and I'm here with longtime and very good friend, Captain Dave Peros, who is the writer for all of our daily dispatches for our fishing reports on Facebook. We're trying a new format today. Eventually, this will turn into a podcast. But for start, you're probably watching this on a YouTube video embedded in our Friday fishing report. And if we're organized enough, we'll see if we can get it on a podcast. But the structure for today in this conversation you're about to watch or listen to is basically going to be Dave and I talking about the week we both experienced, both as first-hand anglers and just being around in the field. And then we'll take a look at the weather and see what some good thoughts for the weekend might be. And you might hear some tips along the way. And so, everybody, welcome to our first, video and podcast of our fishing reports. And I guess I'm going to leave it to Dave to kick off how he started his week, and we'll walk through some, not step by step of the reports, but I'll just walk through the week and extrapolate that going forward.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's good to be with you. I have to say that being a guide, this was a challenging week. We a lot of wind, and so that presented its own problems and issues. But I started out Monday. I did something which I tell people not to do, which, is kind of a pattern, which was don't chase reports. Well, everybody told me Monomoy, Monomoy, Monomoy. Well, I went to Monomoy on Monday. I thought that the wind looked okay. And let's just say I didn't catch anything at Monomoy. I got skunked. I think I'm probably the only person this year who's been skunked at Monomoy. The wind, when I pulled in the parking lot to launch my boat, was a lot stronger. And if you believe in karma, I think that may have played a part of it, because I was like, oh man, the wind, and this is great. And we got kind of a late start, and the people who caught fish that I talked to got a really early start. I mean, we probably didn't hit Monomoy Point until 6:30, 7 o'clock. And by that time, we saw a few people catch fish trolling. But then I got in scramble mode, which, again, something I tell people don't do, stick it out, watch the tide. And like I said, we didn't catch anything. We hooked up a couple of times. But what I heard was that the fish got finicky after an early morning bite. They got finicky, and we saw that fish would come up for 5 seconds. If you happen to hit them on the head, you might get a reaction. But they were pushing sand eels. We really didn't see any signs of squid for the most part. I'm not saying there weren't fish there, because there were. I know people who caught them, but they were early. They got the bite, and I drove home from Monomoy with my tail between my legs, and said, I'm not going back to Monomoy the rest of the year.
You're one of those I quit fishing trips.
Yeah, exactly. I hate fishing. I hate fish. I'm done.
Yeah, we all have those. We all have those. Yeah. The only thing I'm sure, just knowing you, and I don't even want to count the amount of years we fished together, but I know you probably did this, but in that situation when they're coming up and staying up for a very short period of time, light leaders, teeny little lures, maybe something like a 3/8 or 5/8 ounce Hoagie epoxy jig lure and olive or something like that. But you need to be a sharpshooter caster in that, because you said one key thing in there, you need to hit them on the head. And I'm assuming what you meant by that is you have a frisbee sized target, and that lure needs to be ground zero in the middle of the frisbee target if it's going to convert.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was, if you weren't right on them. And it's interesting, we tried a lot of different options, but we did blow up a couple of fish on the charter grade popper. We got it close to them, one pop, bang, and they blew up on it. But again, you had to put it right in the zone. So obviously after Monday, I looked at the forecast and I was like, oh boy, this is, I had folks from Alabama and New York in town, and I'm thinking I've got to get them out on the water. And, we found fish. We actually saw you out there. I think it was on Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Wednesday.
And we did. Yeah.
Yeah. Tuesday. I think Tuesday was a blowout.
Yeah, it was windy. It's so it was painful about hearing your Monday Monomoy experience. I was out a little bit on Tuesday here at Hoagie HQ in Falmouth, and the Nantucket, the closer Nantucket Sound and Vineyard Sound rips were, sometimes they're better than others, but they were consistent here in this part of the world throughout the week. And surprised at how keyed in on the squid they are, considering how slow of a quote unquote squid season we had. So seems like there's still plenty of squid for the stripers to get very keyed in on. And I was just right before this call, I was talking to Captain Eric Staplefeld, and he's amber. Talked to Evan at Eastman's amber. And so the translucent amber, whether it's a dog walker or a popper in my universe, is the reoccurring phrase that I keep hearing. Now, I know from experience on my boat, because I saw you Wednesday in one of the aforementioned rips, and I had the translucent olive, like it's an olive color of the translucent white, and that was doing just as well for us as the amber. And then just out of curiosity, I put a solid white dog walker on, and they had no interest in an all white. But the second we switched back to the amber and at least on my boat, the amber and the translucent olive, they're both translucent colors. It was two rods bent at all times. So it's interesting. They're very keyed in on the squid, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked this week, honestly, to see the level of squid in the rips, and just how ferocious the feeds were. There were times, if you looked in the rip, and the water was just boiling with fish. And I thought one of the keys this week, and you were the first person to mention it, which was that they were off the rip at times. There were times, several, 100, 200 feet off the rip, there were bass just boiling everywhere. I mean, in the flat water. And
I found those fish to be two things. One, a little larger than the fish in the rip, and I think that's more of a competition thing. The bigger fish don't want to compete with the faster, smaller ones. And the other thing I noticed is the hookup ratio, at least on my boat, I'm speaking purely from my perspective, was much higher. It was an instant hookup in front of the rip, well in front of the rip in smooth water, versus when you're casting and it's directly behind the boat presentation of the lure. And my anglers were getting a lot of hits, but having a harder time hooking up when it was directly behind us versus perpendicular or slightly bow forward casts into the smooth water.
Yeah, I think that, you've mentioned it numerous times and we've talked about it. I think that I've noticed on my boat this week, and I've noticed other boats there. First of all, I think with plug fishing in striped bass, way too much reeling and way too fast. I think it's an adrenaline thing. I think it's an excitement thing. And I just found this week, we got fish, we would cast the popper out in the smooth water and let it sit, and the fish would blow up on it. It was just sitting there wobbling. It was, it was making a little commotion, but it wasn't. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the bigger fish just came up and just crushed it. And
well, if you think about it, that like what's going on, you have these squid, which are not the fastest swimmers in the world, right? And they're just getting bullied by the current, getting swept down tide. And that's what the striper is seeing, is these like squid just very vulnerable in the water, just swimming sideways into the rip, trying to stay out of the danger zone because they know what's on the other edge of that other side of that shoal, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't want Mike and I, as Mike said, we've been fishing for years, and one of the things that do is we do voices a lot of times. And one of Mike's famous voices, he'd throw out a plug or something. He'd go, "Oh, look at me, poor little squid getting ripped in there." Wham, and the fish would hit. And that's literally, I mean, what it is. I mean, literally, the plug looks like a squid, and it's struggling, and it's just kind of wobbling, and it's
Trying
and
to mind its own business, you know?
minding it.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah,
Oh, poor little squid minding its own business.
yeah.
And then wham, it just gets clobbered. But I understand the adrenaline rush, but trying to get people sometimes to calm down, let the current work to your advantage. One of my dogs is probably going to go because my wife is driving home. If you hear dogs barking, but yeah, it's just sometimes less is more. I mean, and I understand it's for you or I, we've been fishing for so long. Um, but fly fishermen usually kind of get that. But if spin fishermen would think a little bit like a fly fisherman and swing the plug. I mean, that hoagie charter grade popper, it floats, even if you're not reeling it, it's the rattles are rattling, the mouth is popping, the body is swinging, and it's an easy target. It's
Yeah,
like the
especially if you flag it out, you take that back hook off, you've got that extra bucktail
yeah,
flowing in the water, and
yeah,
the
yeah,
lure's working for you. Yeah,
yeah, no question. And look, we've talked about this all the time about rigging, catch and release style, getting rid of the tail hook, and just going with the one belly hook. Your plugs just have one belly, so it's not a problem. Some plugs will have two belly hooks. In that case, I get rid of the one closest to the tail, and you're going to miss fish. And you made a great point before that you had people hooking up in the flat water more than in the rip. Well, if you think about it, the plug it's bouncing around. Okay, and it's a hard target for the fish to get a hold of, but it's also hard to keep contact with, so sometimes that's why swinging that flat water, okay, you're gonna get better hookups,
yeah, yeah.
uh,
Lure getting hit when it's horizontal to the rip,
mhm,
your hookup ratio is going to go up like exponentially
yeah,
versus like point with if the tail of the tail of the lure is heading backward. Now,
yeah,
yeah, before we move on out of Vineyard Nantucket Sounds, because rip fishing is pretty unique to those bodies of water,
mhm,
compare, zooming out on the Cape, is I just want to talk like just a brief minute on rip etiquette. We just to maybe relive the conversation you and I had earlier this week. And I just want to talk in a positive, constructive way about, because what was happening well, I was out on Wednesday, is the tide was, pushing toward the east, right? And we had a
mhm,
southwest
yep,
wind, so the wind and the
incoming
tide were
tide, yeah,
together.
yeah, yeah,
Yep. And so you would slide from west to east on the rip.
right,
All of a sudden, you'd run out of rip.
yep,
And I noticed boats repositioning one of two ways. One, they were going way up in front of the rip and starting way up tide. Actually, three ways. And the second way is the straightest line between 2 points. And that was my least favorite of the ways, where they would just drive the length of the rip back up to where they wanted to go.
mhm,
And then the third way, which you and I talked about, I've never really seen this before, was running and gunning birds on a rip, and they were pushing the rip. So I thought we could go in reverse order, and break down sort of why each one of those ways is either better or less better than
yeah,
others. But yeah, I'll start with the running and gunning the birds, because it was interesting on Wednesday. The birds are very clustered. They're very in specific spots, and they were moving from spot to spot. And I think that was just because there was a finite amount of birds in the area. But
Right.
there was fish, like from left to right, right to left. There was fish evenly distributed throughout the whole rip. So chasing the birds was sort of an unnecessary function, and that just caused more boat traffic and disturbance in the water. And a guy like me, when birds are in one spot or the other, and I know zoomed out that the fish are evenly distributed, even if they're not evenly distributed, they tend to shift. And so if you run to one spot, chances are by the time you get there, they're somewhere else. So it feels a little bit like albie fishing. So I feel like you're doing more harm than good by chasing the birds with the extra commotion and the disturbance in the water. And you might go a little nutty because the birds keep moving. And so I'm going to again reiterate the systematic approach, knowing that they're evenly distributed and making long drifts. I'm going to let you handle the point A to point B thing up the seam of the rip, because that to me is the most problematic.
Yeah, I mean, it just what I found was the people chasing birds a lot of times, the one you mentioned earlier, typically if I'm changing position on a rip, I always go way out off the rip. I mean, probably more than I have to go off the rip. Hey, Remy. Remy, quiet. Yeah. Hello.
Are you still here? I'm just setting up a little diagram
Okay.
for the rip here.
Okay, you're going to whiteboard. Yeah, and sorry about my dog. She'll quiet in a minute. Remy, stop. Enough. You're a good girl. Enough. Thank you. So they listen to me like the fish listen to me. So the thing what I found was that you were talking about chasing the birds and point to point, and a lot of times the birds are focused on a particular point. Is that when you're doing that, and I'm changing position, I'm off the rip. I actually people cut inside of me, going right down the rip to try to get to a point. I mean, they had no idea I was outside. I'm looking at the rip to reposition, and I'd look and they're flying down the rip to get to another spot, and totally unaware that there's another boat even there. And what was the funniest part was they would race down the rip, looking at the birds, and in their wake, there were fish breaking everywhere. And they'd go flying past us, and I'd let them go by, and I would just swing my boat, and we'd hook up. Because
so say with the, so this was the boat chasing the bird, the one I just circled there, and you're that I'm not an artist, but the middle B, and then there's another boat, the third B. This boat, rather than just staying and working on these fish, he's obsessed with those birds.
Yeah.
He was just going straight right across the rip and in front of you, where I would say textbook would say to go, I'll call it 100 yards out in front and over. And I think 100 yards is a good rule of thumb.
100 yards, 50 yards, something, a lot more than you would actually think that you'd want to. But what amazes me is that they were right. They were right inside of me. They had no idea, that we were even there. And they would just go flying down, and then we would just slide in behind them, and catch fish, because there were fish there. And as you said before, there were fish this week. I fished there this morning again, but Wednesday and Thursday and Tuesday as well, that the rips were fishing unbelievably well. I mean, they weren't monster fish. There were some good ones, but the amount of squid.
But if everybody, and then we'll move on from the rips, talk a little bit about Cape Cod Bay. But if everybody took the approach to swing out either 50 or 100, I like 100 because a lot of times there's fish sort of in that zone in front of the rip in the smooth water.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And if everybody took that approach and created sort of like a rotation system, whereas everyone's drifting in the same direction, you can quadruple the amount of boats that can peacefully fish a spot like middle ground or hedge fence or wasky or sucking mess and fill in the blank.
Right.
And so just the best practices. And a lot of folks don't know because it is logical. The straightest distance between 2 points is a straight line. If that straight line's up the seam of the rip, I guess it makes sense. And you'll probably catch something if you do that. But you do too many boats do that too many times, you'll shorten the bite from what could have been 2 hours to 30 minutes. And
Well,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, again, there are no absolutes in anything. But the bottom line is running up a rip line in the white water at
spooks
any
fish.
time is wrong. It's dangerous. It's wrong. It's unproductive. It's discourteous.
Disruption to other boats. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's inexcusable. And I see people do it. I get the excitement. And I think it's really important as a guide myself to explain to folks that I'm not picking on recreational anglers or newcomers, because I tell you, some of the worst behavior I've seen on rip lines is from guides. Okay.
and also shit happens. Like, for
Yeah.
example, I was out on Tuesday and I was at Hedge Fence and I had two anglers in the boat. Two fish came in. It was a bit of a precarious dehooking situation in the back. All of a sudden, I looked up and I drifted down on another boat, and I was inappropriately close. And I bill myself as being very proactively, courteous, but that happened. And all it took was a friendly wave. Hey, man, sorry. Drifted down. I had two fish, and then I did the whole go up in front of the rip far away. It was
Yeah.
cool. It was like, you know what I mean? And so if something does happen, it's not the end of the world. A friendly, courteous little, hey, sorry, I got too close. And then the one parting tip here is, if you're coming up and setting up on a spot, if another boat has to stop its cast short to not hook yours, I feel like you're stopping too close to another boat. That's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, that's a very good rule of thumb. The other thing I would say too to that is that the challenge, for example, you see a lot of people a lot of times trying to fish a rip by themselves. That's a totally different subject. Don't want to get into it. I have my own opinion about it. Bottom line is your boat's getting sucked into the rip, and when it's really moving, your first responsibility is control of your boat.
100%.
And I stem the tide. Okay, I go by the Hoagie playbook. Okay, a little plug for the Captain Mike's inshore playbook and the casting into a rip approach. And I like to stem. I know a lot of guys don't have someone to run the boat for them. And they set up and they drift into the rip, and you see them drifting down at you, and they basically have given up complete control of their boat. I personally, I'm sorry. You're responsible for your boat. You drift down on me and I'm stemming the tide, and I stem. I hold my boat in its position to give my people its best shot. That's your problem. Now, obviously, if you crash into me, then it's my problem. But it's interesting you mentioned, because at a future date we can talk about your experiences at Wasky when you were running the Doughboy and chartering. It's the same thing. You hook up, you have to drift out of the rip to land a fish, and you'll see people jump right in behind you where you were. Common courtesy is when that person swings around and comes back, if they kind of want to get back into that spot, and your thing is so true. There are fish everywhere, okay? And we don't own a spot. However, if I sneak in when someone drifts through and I see them, they want to come back, I go somewhere else. I don't.
Yeah. And everybody has a time in it. And I remember, I feel like rotation systems were far more common when I was running a charter boat in the 90s. So people would figure out, there's fewer boats too, but everyone would have their time. If you didn't get a fish in your 5-minute window, you would slide off in the next boat. It was sort of like it was almost like there was an unofficial traffic guard waving boats through, and everybody even if some of the charter boats had beefs between each other, it was gospel to follow that harmonious rotation system because everyone wins in that scenario and everyone loses if people aren't collectively working as a team in a spot. And more boats can fish the same spot.
Yeah.
And but
And I
anyway,
will say this, looking ahead to the weekend, just be advised, fishing's good, but it's going to be a good weekend weather-wise. Looks nice, lighter winds. There are going to be a lot of people, and you might think to yourself, get out early, get your fish, and maybe go find your own fish somewhere else because I can tell you middle ground by about 7 o'clock, you see people waking up and the rip it's amazing how many boats show up. I mean,
and I want to move on to Cape Cod Bay in a sec, but there's fish on every rip pretty much, some more than others. And
yeah,
yeah. So I am clueless, Dave, about what's going on in Cape Cod Bay. Have you heard anything? I know from a hoagie wearing the hoagie hat perspective, we're shipping a heck of a lot of tubes to shops that cater to that neck of the woods
absolutely.
and
Yep.
to the e-commerce. So I'm gonna feels a little early to me for the tube, but I guess with this heat wave, it doesn't surprise me. But we're blowing our June record this year for tube sales in Cape Cod Bay.
Yeah, I mean, it's really what you just said was the same for me. When I talked with Jeff Miller, he's up at Canal Bait and Tackle, and when he was talking about tubes, I sold out all of my tubes today. I sold all my worms out today, and it's the same story in other shops. I'm thinking tube and worm in June. It didn't, but I think that's kind of a pattern for this whole season. Nothing has, in my opinion, has gone to what, which is, I mean, that's fishing.
Right.
But the interesting thing is, according to Jeff, a lot of the tube and worm fishing has been in deep water. It hasn't
Huh.
been in that fairly tight to sandy neck. It's actually been out, 40 feet of water, 50 feet of water.
And I'm a newbie to Cape Cod Bay, being a Falmouth boy, but that's like fishing ledge out that way, or
Yeah, a fishing ledge, well off the parking lot. And again, that's where, in your case, we've talked about it. You have the trolling weights, okay? Lead core line. Jeff said they're still selling lead core. In fact, he sold all his lead core out. I know a lot of people associate wireline with fishing deep, but lead core is a lot easier, especially if you have inexperienced anglers. It will get down really well, but you have the trolling weights.
I have a few tips in that regard. So I used to be, we've been fishing since the 90s, but I'm not going to do the math, but uh, um, I used to be a huge advocate for wire in the early 90s, then a huge advocate for lead core, then the evolution. Then you would see me with my fancy LC13 custom cut up from Cortland. Now I've come to the point where I feel like I can get deeper with 40 or 30-pound test braid in combination with a trolling weight. And interestingly, in that situation, I like an unweighted tube like we have with the tubes we make. They're technically weighted because there's about 1.25 ounce stainless steel helix core to make it swim down the middle, so it's not weight free. But so I use a technique called it's a troll scan. So I'll troll along with the weights, but with that light braid, if I were to take the boat out of gear and either put it in free spool or just let the weight of 3.5 or 4 ounce sinker sinking it down with the tube, it gets down. I feel like it almost gets down faster than the lead core because there's so much less restriction of that thin braid in that trolling weight. Now remember that tube is weightless, so it just sinks down. I just lay them on the sandy bottom and put the boat back in gear. And that emergence off the bottom is where, at least in I fish Cape Cod Bay with the tubes maybe half dozen times a year. And like that's where we get all the hookups. It was when we emerge it off the bottom. I think a lot of people think tubes look like sea worms, look like eels. I think the bass are thinking they're giant sea worms. and
Yeah,
just
yeah,
slow and lethargic emerging off the bottom is, I feel like what the natural look is.
yeah. And I think it goes back to what you said before. People always ask me, can you fish a tube without a worm? My answer is you can. Don't expect to catch anything. Okay. That worm makes a huge difference. It makes all the difference. Now, I've known
So
people.
I'm on the same camp as you, but we sell a lot of tubes, a lot of folks that don't put anything on them and have great luck. I'm
Yeah,
just too stuck in, we're
yeah,
from the same fishing generation, so
yeah. I
it's
mean,
hard to
but
it's
again,
hard to depart from that.
yeah, yeah, you have to change the thing. I know guys who've used eel skins for tubes. I've known people who've used pork rind for tubes on tubes.
And
Again,
I've personally used the fish bite sea worms.
yeah, yeah.
That, yeah, and it feels weird to me because again, I'm a fairly old school individual like yourself. We get
Mhm.
along famously that way, but yeah, the fish bite sea worms is unbelievable.
They're awesome. You
Captain
know
Nat,
what?
yeah, Captain
Yeah,
Nat Chalkley turned me onto those.
yeah, those are awesome. And I'm going to tell you what, the whole fish bites thing. Uh, if you're taking your kids cup fishing and you're used to doing squid, the fish bites work super well and they stay on the hook a lot longer. I mean, they just, the fish bites definitely work. It's interesting. You were talking about your tubes. Jeff was telling me that the Hoagie tube, perfect tube, is bar none the absolute favorite of kayak guys. And I mean, honestly, it's almost like kayaks were born to tube and worm.
Oh,
It's
yeah, that
yeah,
go as slow as you can go and then cut it in half was always the advice I gave for tube and
yeah,
worm.
exactly. And Jeff was saying they absolutely love the Hoagie perfect tube. Because they just, you know, like you said, that if there's a mistake that most people make on the tube and worm, is they go too fast. Okay, they just do. And to get back to what you were saying about, you know, you're an electronics guy. You know me. I have no idea what I'm looking at on my electronics. But I know people, I mean, Bruce Miller told me years ago, he said he would be tube and worm. He would mark fish, he would put it out of gear and let line and drop the tube right down in the fish's head. And hook and like
Tactical trolling. It's a lot more interactive too. So as an
correct.
angler versus a catcher, the
Mhm.
angler in me likes that
Yeah,
tactical approach because it's very
yeah.
interactive.
Now
Now,
the
what are you
one
hearing? Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, oh, overboard.
Yeah, no, we got my AirPod.
Okay, you got the
We're back.
earpod. Don't
Yeah.
blame me for dropping it overboard. I've had to have my Mike in the past and handing off his iPhone. We watched it go over the side of the boat. So
It's amazing how slow the iPhone syncs. It's torturous.
uh but the interesting thing is there are some pogie schools up in the Plymouth area off Manomet. If you remember 2 years ago, they had those acres of pogies up there and everybody was up there snagging and dropping. And apparently they're there. But Jeff was telling me yesterday, yeah, if you find a school of pogies, you can fish. But what's been working, he said the best is trolling deep diving swimmers. Like the Hoagie Charter Great Swimmer. He said that type of plug has been crushing it in 40 feet, 50 feet of water. Some people just get so obsessed with the pogie schools they lose their minds and forget that, hey, troll a swimming plug, get a pro tail down, do something different. And Jeff was real. I mean, it was kind of cool when he sent me the text and he said, by the way, just so you know, trolling is taking more fish than snag and drop because the pogie schools are not super thick and heavy. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
and judging by the fish picks I'm getting from Captain Terry Nugent, he's getting some real. It's funny. I never really thought of him as a troller, but he's gotten it down to a very tactical way. I just want to say one footnote is we had some tips about the perfect tubes and the Hoagie swimming plugs. These tips are, there's a number of other, perfectly good brands out there too, and these tips are all, obviously I'm biased with hoagie hat that I'm wearing. But but all these tips are certainly pertinent to the other brands out there. Obviously, which ones I think fish better, but opinion there. Um, but just one thing about fishing around bait, and my roots. I started off as a fly fisherman, so I'm definitely a lure guy. But when there's plenty of situations where you encounter a problem of too much bait, right? And I don't like competing with Mother Nature. So if you have like a big school of pogies, say, I don't want to compete with the fish that are eating 1 pound pogies at will. You know what I mean? Just swimming through the school. I like to search the fish that have gotten off the mark and are trying to get back into the program, the adjacent fish.
Mhm.
And I'd go to the grave saying this is why Jeff is right in that case with the trolling guys out fishing the pokey guys. Is the bass keying on the pogies are like myopically focused on the pogies, and trolling the perimeter just near the schools but outside. You've got that stripers that are separate from the school, and you get that FOMO, the fear of missing out function of those fish, and that's how you can more easily catch those fish and not compete with the Mother Nature measured in actual like gross tonnage pounds.
Well, yeah,
And
I mean, and the thing about the swimming plug too is that you don't have to have pogies. You can, if you've got structure, if you know a place where you've caught fish before, there may not be any pogies around, but don't forget pogies, that's imprinted. And, I mean, I mean, we can say whatever we want. I love artificial lures. You love artificial lures. I was making fun of someone this morning. He was once again trying to convince me how complicated live lining pogies is. And it's like, we won't get into that. I was like, I mean, but I've been eel fishing on the islands, down the Elizabeth Islands, when it was really, really good. And I see a couple of guys, and they were really funny. They would cast their pogies up into the air and let them slam on the water, and it would stun them. And it was almost like the bass would hear the pogie slap the water, and these guys were releasing 30-pound fish. I mean, I'm not kidding. Just looking for big fish. And if they were there, I was gone. The fish wouldn't even look at a live eel. I mean, when they get fixated on pogies, forget about
it's
it.
all over. Yeah, it's all over.
It's all over. Just give it up. Go someplace else. Those fish want pogies. So Jeff was even saying these guys were, like I said, in 40 feet of water, on structure, on drop-offs, and we're trolling, and they weren't even necessarily trolling near pogie school. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. But so yeah, okay, bait's great, it works, but like you said, I mean, hey, I'll tell people, I'll give you a plug, go take a look at the video of you last year with Terry when you first brought out the Charter Great Swimmer and you got that 50-pound fish. I mean, it's proof in the pudding. I mean, those swimming plugs of that variety, they get deep, they get down where the fish are, and I mean, they catch, you get some, I mean, when I saw that video, I was like, oh, brother, now I'm not
Hey,
trolling.
Dave.
I don't care what Mike
Yeah,
says. I don't care about the Charlie Great Swimmer. I'm not going to start trolling.
yeah, I'll get you converted. Hey, Dave, I just looked at the clock, so
Yeah.
I just want to
Yeah.
touch on a couple other things. So, have you heard anything in the race up by P Town out that way? Is there anything going on out that way?
I'll be honest with you. What I've heard was that there's a genuine lack of mackerel, and it's really slowed fishing in Cape Cod Bay up in that area. I've heard that,
Would that transfer to Barnstable Harbor that way
yeah,
too?
Bonstable's got some smaller fish, but I mean, I talked to Amy over at the sports port, and she said that there are no mackerel, so the live lining guys basically have had a really rough season. Billingsgate Shoal hasn't been super hot. It seems that a lot of the fish, went right up to Boston Harbor and north, that they almost bypassed, in some cases, the canal. They didn't come through the canal and get in the bay. They went around the outside. And so it's been I would say Cape Cod Bay, other than those tube and worm guys. And again, that's more towards the western part of Cape Cod Bay. From what I understand, the eastern part, from Orleans all the way to Race Point, it's been, there are always fish, but you fished it when it's, lights out. And from what
Now,
I understand, it hasn't been lights out. So, I
now
mean,
that's a good segue to the canal. I'm not a canal guy. I respect it. It's just not something. But from what I'm hearing, it's a bit of a pick, but it can be good. But you got to put your time in. Is that a safe assumption
yeah,
for the canal fishery?
yeah, people who are not a fish the canal are catching fish. I call them the YouTubers, the guys in the last, when they had the blitzes from 5 years ago that were, posting videos. They're waiting for other people to tell them where the fish are. You have to work. It's a struggle. It's a jig bite. The new moon didn't shape up in June. We've got the full moon. I think the full moon's tomorrow. I think the 22nd. So this
It's
week,
tomorrow, I think.
yeah. So this
I'll,
week,
I'll go with that.
okay, this week, you got the breaking tides, those early morning east turning tides. There hasn't been a topwater bite. I mean, there's that big push of, that everybody associates with the canal when everybody goes crazy. So are there fish? No question. You might have guys are fishing nights. They're jigging paddle tails. They're bucktailing a little bit, but it's not, believe me, there are a lot of sad faces.
It's an angler's game.
Exactly. Exactly. This is where the old school guys, the guys who know how to read the canal and put their time in. It's not, cast out a magic swimmer, rip it back and have a 30-pound fish. That is not, I mean, there've been spurts, but no, there has not been it's been tough. Yeah, it's been tough.
Huh.
So,
That's too bad. I know a lot of people count on it. But seeing the amount of fish, um, seeing the amount of fish I'm seeing in the sounds, I don't think that ship has sailed for the canal this year.
no,
And
no, no.
yeah, and
No, I don't think so
uh,
either. They got to get some bait. I mean, the problem is they've got very little bait in the canal, and big bait is what drives the canal, whether it be mackerel or pogies. I would say honestly, even though I could prove that I'm a perfect example of someone who can prove that when everybody else is catching fish on a location, Dave Peros can catch nothing. Monomoy has been I mean, there's a lot of fish there. The tuna bite is good out east. I mean, I hear people are doing very well there.
yeah. So the tuna bite, it was hot and heavy. I feel like it cooled off for a bit,
Mhm.
and who knows after this blow we've had this week. I feel like we're ready for a system reset out east, and we have at least one calm day, offshoreable day this weekend. And I personally know half dozen anglers that are pointed east. Um,
Yep.
it's been a jig bite east. I went last Tuesday. I saw infinity. I broke all my tuna rules. Don't target tuna in under 100 feet of water.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I can't catch them in shallow water. And two, when they're jumping and falling back into the water slower than 9.82 meters per second squared, well, they give you the side eye. That's a bad sign. I don't know if anybody listening or watching is a trout fisherman, but it feels a lot like a midge hatch. And that's a good time to go home and eat breakfast. But
Yeah.
I grinded that out, had a couple blow ups, but it was like muskie fishing. I made 999 casts. I don't know if people know the saying for muskie, the fish of 1,000 casts. Well, if
Mhm.
those fish were a fish of 1,000 casts, I think I made 999. And but what's painful is if I had followed and read my playbook I would have left those fish and done a recon and found the jig bite maybe 3.5 miles down the road. That's the direction the wind was biting in deeper water. They're keying on the same thing, but a little more receptive.
Mhm.
That said, that was out of Crab Ledge. That bite cooled off right before the blow, but there's so many pushes of fish coming
Mhm.
through, and I've heard all kinds of rumors south, and just that. So I don't have a whole lot of confidence in what I'm saying right now, but I know this time of year it can be good one day, not good the next,
Mhm.
and not too far away in New York waters, boats running out of Montauk, which a lot of times we share the same dump, is equidistant to Falmouth and Montauk, for
Yep.
example.
Yep.
And so, it still blows my mind every time I think about that. But when I look at the map, it makes sense. But um, there's fish not too far from our local haunts. And
Yeah.
if I were to go offshore this weekend, and I'm a Falmouth guy again, so I'm looking at the south side, I would run to the Claw. I'd go to Cox's. I'd veer over maybe the northwest corner of the dump, go as far east as 31 Fathom Hole
Mhm.
on my loop back, cross over the Fingers, and intersect back with the Claw again. And I know you'll see bait in life, but I would say you have at least a 50% chance at finding tuna if you run that loop. And what I like about that play is you always come home with dinner because there's plenty of opportunity to vertical jig sea bass between, Squibnocket, Nomans, and Gayhead, and any of the. Just look at your GPS plotter for good structure on your
Yep.
Garmin or Simrad or whatever you're using,
Yeah.
and just send some. You don't even need bait, just a sexy little jig that can hold bottom and whatever the current is at the time. Let's say come home with fish, and I'm almost certain you'd find fish at Gayhead stripers on Gayhead on the way home. So
Yeah.
I like
Well, the
that
thing.
early season recon.
Well, the thing is about the tuna. Again, I've never caught a tuna. Probably never will. Throwing poppers and stuff. But two things I would mention is that Evan over at Eastman's told me that there is a decent troll bite at times down by the BB buoy. I guess there's been there, but the interesting story was Connor Swartz. He works over at Red Top, really young, intense angler. He went out of a boat to Rhode Island last weekend, and they went just south of Montauk, or that Montauk area, and they were popping small bluefin, which
Is that the spot called the Ranger? Is it the Ranger out that way? Does
yeah,
that sound right?
probably,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, I don't
and he
know. I
said,
don't know those spots that well.
yeah, and he said it was a blast. He said it was a lot of fun, and hopefully, I guarantee there's a lot of people hoping that whole bluefin, that tuna bite goes off south of the Vineyard like last year, because
Yeah.
that was wild. But yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of good stuff
Yeah.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I bet cash money if you did a good recon loop south of the Vineyard or a good recon loop east,
mhm.
um, you're at least going to have a shot at an actual real shot at catching a tuna either way. And
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there's plenty of bait. It's time. They've been here. And this
Mhm.
time of year, it's with this warm weather, and it's been southwest all week.
Right.
That's like in my playbook I talk about that quite a bit. Is
Mhm.
one of the triggers for me to invest some fuel without a whole lot of intel is 2
Yep.
or 3 days in June with really strong southwest winds, which we just
Yeah,
literally just had.
absolutely. So yeah, and I think there's a lot of, it's interesting you mentioned the sea bass. Everybody was telling me that the sea bass seem to be moving into a little deeper water. Although you seem to be doing just fine in relatively shallow water. So, I mean, the thing about you though is that you really honed in on structure, which I think.
Yeah, I don't have specific sea bass spots. I just look at my chart plotter, and if I
Mhm.
like if there's a rock or a wreck or whatever, I try it.
Mhm.
And it's funny this year I've been getting my biggest sea bass at slack tide, just
Yep.
thumping the bottom with our new
Mhm.
groundfish beaky jigs because it looks very much like a crab. And when the tide gets cooking, the big fish are mixed in, but for whatever reason, it's slack tide at my percentage of big sea bass. I may be catching fewer actual fish, but my big fish per capita. Am I saying that right? My big
Yeah.
fish per capita with the with the sea bass is slack tide. I've never really thought about it on that level of sea bass before, but just thumping that jig on the bottom, imitating a crab. It just the hits have been very subtle, and then they go berserk when you hook them. It's kind of interesting.
What I love
You know,
about what I love about the beaky jig thing too is when I talk to sea bass people and they talk to me about when they're on the north side of the Vineyard or whatever, and the current's really moving, they're using 8 to 12 ounces of lead. I mean, that just 8 to 12 ounces of lead, just I mean, bottom fishing with that much weight where you're using the beaky jig at towards slack water, you don't need that kind of weight. And you're gonna
ounce
get
and a half jig on my medium outfit,
that's just
and
so much more fun than, I mean, 12 ounces of weight. It's just they've just blown my
that's cod fishing in my mind.
mind.
Hey, Dave, I had to pick up my daughter at 1, so
Yeah, yeah.
I can be
Well,
I can be a few I can be a few minutes late, but not categorically.
No. You got to. Emma's
So
important.
yeah, and so real quick, we got this weather forecast for this weekend. I feel like it's changed every time I look at it, but it looks like what are you seeing for a forecast this weekend?
I'm saying winds tomorrow. Again, 13 to 15 southwest. It looks pretty good. Sunday's looking like decent weather. I mean, it's a lot better than it was earlier in the week. I think later in the day on Sunday, or maybe it's afternoon time, it looks like it's going to really come up because Monday looks really, really, Monday looks bad. So I would say Sunday, it's going to be a morning. I would definitely not go offshore Monday and expect to run back. I mean, Sunday. Tomorrow is definitely the pick of the week, the weekend. I'd say you could probably get in some decent fishing Sunday morning, but I mean, really check your forecast out because quite frankly, the forecast this past week with the wind was so off. I mean,
Oh
yesterday,
boy, yeah,
I mean, when you
yeah.
saw me going out, Mike saw me going out Thursday afternoon for a second charter, trying to get people on the water, and we got croaked. I mean, I mean, and it wasn't even a small craft advisory out. And when we got it was as bad as I ever want to be out there in. So, look at your forecast, but also trust your eyes, trust your instincts. And I joke, I have what I call the +10 rule. I take the wind forecast, add 10 knots to it, and I'm generally closer to, I mean, yesterday it was blowing 30 at one point. I checked the buoy, I think it was, and it was like there wasn't even 30 in anybody's forecast. 10 to 15 all week long. They kept saying 10 to 15 southwest, 10 to 15 southwest. So yeah, but I definitely think the weekend.
But on the flip side, it can be wrong in the other direction too, just as many
Absolutely.
times.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of best option that morning, and that's why and I got to conclude after this. But my fishing minimalism, my simple system where it's easy to unload and reload and adapt to any situation is I don't really think too much about my game plan until my boat's loaded that morning, and I look out the window, and if it's windy, yeah, that might be a middle ground trip. If it's a nice calm morning, I might make the run to Monomoy or head offshore or whatever,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and so you can, and I have some friends that are really into weather and they overthink it. I'm a big fan of getting down to the boat as early as you can. That's always a good rule of thumb, and just looking out the window, so to speak, and making best call.
Yeah.
And
And remember, if you're in Falmouth Harbor, poke your nose out a couple hundred yards, because what's happening at the dock usually means nothing once you clear the jetties at most harbors, as soon as you get out into the sound. So yeah, but I'm glad today was good. I went fishing today, and it was nice to not get croaked, because I know you were laughing at me when I went out the other day, kind of going, oh.
well, the good news, and I'm going to definitely conclude on this.
Yeah.
The good news is the fish are close, and
Yes.
and so So get out there, folks, and
Yeah.
hopefully you'll see us again next week.
Yeah, we look forward to it. Thanks, Mike.
All right, take care, everybody. Okay,
Take
bye-bye.
care. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.